I slept with more than 500 men for money in 6 years. But not just any men, I slept with billionaires, politicians, celebrities, and businessmen. And guess what? I do not regret it. Here is what I wish I knew before eventually becoming Australia's highest paid escort. It all started when I was 15 and I had just watched Secret Diary of a Call Girl. I saw Belle de Jour living this glamorous life, going to luxury hotels, wearing designer clothes, working on her own terms, and I thought that is what I want. I didn't really think about the sex part necessarily, but I wanted the freedom to never hear, "We can't afford it again," because that is all I heard growing up. I grew up poor, like very poor. My mom would pick syringes out of our front garden in the morning so that we wouldn't see them when we came outside. We had iron bars in our windows because we lived in a really dodgy area. The words of our household were, "We cannot afford it." We said it so much that it should have been our family mantra. And as I got older, it affected me more and more because I saw my friends doing things that I couldn't afford to do. I also didn't feel sexually desirable when everybody got to the age that they had started dating because I didn't even have the money to look nice. I had really bad teeth and my parents couldn't afford to fix them. But I knew what I wanted. And from the moment I watched that show at 15, I knew escorting was something that I had to try. I just had to wait until I turned 18. In the meantime, I got a government job. I worked 9 till 5. I took the train into the office and I would literally count down the seconds until 5 p.m. so I could leave. And to make it worse, the money wasn't great either. I was barely making enough to survive. So 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, I called my dad and I said, "Dad, I'm single, I'm 18, and I want to become an escort." You probably think he freaked out, but instead he gave me practical advice. He said, visit multiple brothels, talk to the women working there, and do my research. So I did. I visited 3 parlors, I met the owners, and I spoke with the other workers. But the night of my first shift, I was terrified. I stood outside that brothel and I called my dad. I told him I didn't know what to do. He said, make friends with the other girls, and if you're not comfortable, just walk out at any time. But even with his reassurance, I was still shaking as I walked in. I got in there, I was led to a locker, told to change into lingerie, and then before I could even process what was happening, I found myself standing in a lineup of 20 other women, some way hotter than me, all of them more experienced than me, waiting for the client to pick one of us. Then the client picked me. As I was being led toward the room, I was so anxious, I leaned over to the girl next to me and I whispered, "What do I do?" Because up until now, I had just slept with 3 men in my personal life. And to make it worse, these establishments don't really give you any training on how to do it. My only source of information was the Secret Diary of a Call Girl. So she whispered back to me, shower, massage, then the deed. That was it. That was my training. But when I walked into that room, I realized that the guy was just as nervous as I was. This was not some confident, experienced man who knew exactly what he was doing. This was his first time in a paid scenario too. So there we were, 2 people who had no idea what they were doing, fumbling through the most awkward version of intimacy you could imagine. What are the chances of that? But I ran through the steps like a checklist. Shower, check. Massage, check. The deed, honestly, I don't even remember the details. I just remember thinking, this is it. This is what I've been building up in my head for 3 years. There was no romance, no build-up or emotional connection. But you know what I do remember? I remember walking out of that room with cash in my hand. That night, I made $1,000 in 6 hours, more than anything I'd made working 40 hours a week at my government job. I went home, I spread that cash out on my bed, I took a photo, I still have it, and I thought I am a rock star. I felt so powerful, I felt in control, I felt like I had finally found the answer to everything I had been frustrated about my entire life. For the first time, I wasn't the girl with bad teeth who couldn't afford things. I was the girl making more money in one night than most people made in a week. But I wish someone had told me, your first time probably won't be magical. It might be awkward. You might not even remember the details, but that doesn't mean you did it wrong. So stop putting so much pressure on yourself to make it perfect. The physical act of sex is actually the easiest part of any relationship, be it in a paid scenario or in a romantic one. Your worries about whether you will do it right, about whether it will hurt, or whether they'll like it, or if it's not as big as you want it to be, everything else, the emotions, the expectations, the aftermath, that is what no one prepares you for. For the first 12 months of working at that brothel, I was living the dream I had imagined at 15. The money, the excitement, the sexual attention, the new shoes, the bags, the luxury nights out I could now afford. I felt desired for the first time in my life and I had everything I wanted. I was doing something I wasn't supposed to do, which honestly only made it more attractive to me. I've always been a bit of a rebel. But then the honeymoon period ended and the glamour started to fade. The clients stopped being interesting businessmen from Secret Diary Call Girl and they started being, well, just men. Some didn't smell good, some weren't good at it, some pushed boundaries, and some were dangerous. One day, while I was working a shift at the brothel, another girl pulled me aside. She told me there was a regular client who had a habit of piercing holes in condoms intentionally. He was highly manipulative, highly intentional, and he clearly got away with it every time somehow. So I went straight to management. I expected them to ban him to protect us or to do something. Instead, they looked at me and said, "Oh, he wouldn't do that, he's a big spender." That moment really hurt me, not just because of what the client was doing, but because the people who were supposed to have my back actually didn't. They prioritized his money over my safety, and it almost made me question if I was the one in the wrong. That is why I wish someone had told me to learn to trust myself. When your gut tells you something, don't just accept it as the absolute truth. Act on it. Collect data, ask questions, investigate to validate or invalidate what you're feeling. Because sometimes your gut instinct might be wrong, and that's okay. But you will only know if you actually look into it. And once you have the facts, once you've gathered the evidence, make your own decision, even if everyone around you is telling you you're wrong, because now you have data. Now you know the truth, and that truth matters more than anyone else's opinion, even if they're the ones in charge. That is also when I realized I was not as in control as I thought I was. Working in a brothel meant someone else made the rules. Someone else decided which clients I had to deal with. Someone else decided what was acceptable, and I had very little say in any of it. But that wasn't the only thing weighing on me. Around the same time, I was also dealing with a lot of internalized shame. You see, I've always wanted a big family. I wanted to settle down with the love of my life. But every time I imagined that future, this voice in my head would whisper, "No good man is going to want you after this." So I kept one foot in the door and one foot out the door. I would work a few shifts at the brothel, then spend the rest of the time trying to build my normal career as a personal trainer. I told myself I was being smart and keeping my options open, or as some people would say, I was diversifying. But really, I was just terrified. I was terrified of committing fully to escorting because of what people would think. I was terrified of letting go of the normal path because at least that felt safe and socially acceptable. And because I was splitting my focus, I just wasn't excelling at anything. I was stuck, I was comfortable, and I was safe. And that safety was killing any chance I had of actually moving forward. That is why I spent 3 years working at a brothel. Until one day I sat down with my mentor and I finally said the truth out loud. I told him, "I am terrified no one will ever love me if I do this full time." And just saying it out loud, acknowledging the fear, changed everything. Because once I named it, I realized I was letting the idea of what someone else might think about me stop me from building the life I actually wanted. So I made a choice. If staying single for the next 10 years meant I could build real financial independence so my future kids would never grow up poor like I did, then that is what I would do. I wasn't going to let fear make my decisions anymore. So I left the brothel, I left the backup plans, I ditched my personal training career, and I went independent. I was 19, almost 20 when this all happened, and within a year, I went from making $155 an hour in a brothel to charging $2,000 an hour as a private escort. And you know what's funny? That fear I had that no man would ever love me or accept me because I was a full-time escort was completely wrong. During my 6 years as a working escort, I had 3 serious relationships with men who knew exactly what I did and loved me anyway. But that didn't mean I didn't have my fair share of bad relationships. I met someone and I thought we could have a great relationship. He was smart, ambitious, everything I had been looking for. And when we started dating, he knew what I did because I actually met him through my work. He said he could handle it, but over time, it became clear that he couldn't. And I didn't want to admit that to myself because deep down, I was still afraid that no one else would ever accept me. That if I lost him, I would be alone forever. So I stayed and I spent the next year trying to change his mind. I would come home from a booking and he would ask me how my day was, but the look on his face told me he did not really want to know. We would fight about it constantly. He would say he was fine with it, but his actions said otherwise. And I was exhausted from defending myself, exhausted from trying to prove I was still worthy of love even though I was doing this job. But then I realized the real problem was not him, it was me. Because I was conforming to his values instead of living my own. I was making myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable just to keep him around. And that fear that no one else would ever love me crept back in and was holding me back from everything I actually wanted to achieve. Until one day I decided to end things with him. And I realized realized I had wasted so much time trying to convince someone to accept me when I should have been focused on what I wanted to build. And that is when I made a vow to myself. I would never stop working or change my path for anyone or anything before I was ready. Not for a man, not for society's approval, not for nothing. And that is how I increased my rate from $1,500 an hour to $2,000 an hour, making me Australia's highest charging escort at just 22. Here is what I learned. You are going to make choices in your life that other people will not understand. Maybe it's your career, maybe it's who you date, maybe it's just how you express yourself. But if you spend all your time trying to make yourself acceptable to everyone else, you will never actually become who you're meant to. That is why you need to stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. Because the version of you that is trying to be acceptable to everyone is not the version that is going to build the life you actually want. The life you want requires you to be unapologetically yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people judge you, and even when you are the only one who believes in your path. And the moment you stop apologizing for who you are, everything changes. Not just your income, but your confidence, your relationships, and your entire sense of self-worth. Which brings me to a turning point that happened after I had already left the industry. I went through something traumatic, something completely unrelated to my work as an escort, and in the aftermath I made a decision. I was going to be celibate for 1 year. For the first 9 months, I barely left my apartment. I stopped seeing friends, I stopped going out, I just existed. Then one day, I forced myself to go to the gym. I was on a treadmill when a man walked past me and I caught his scent. That was it, just his scent. And for the first time in months, I felt something. I missed this. Not the sex or the money, but the connection. The presence of another human being who wanted to be near me. And that is when it finally clicked. For 6 years, I thought I understood what men wanted when they came to me, but I didn't. Not really. I thought it was about sex, about physical attraction, about being desirable, but that wasn't it at all. What people actually wanted was the feeling of being seen, not just physically, but as a whole person. Most people are starving for connection. They are in relationships where they're tolerated, not desired, and they are so desperate to feel valued again that they will pay for it. Not because they're broken or pathetic, but because they're human. And humans need to feel like they matter. I had clients who were married, successful, and objectively fine. But they would sit across from me and talk about how they felt invisible in their own lives, how their partners had stopped touching them, looking at them, caring for them. And that is when I realized this is what kills relationships. Not cheating, not arguments, not even falling out of love. But when one person stops making the other feel wanted, when you stop looking at your partner the way you used to, when you stop touching them, complimenting them, making them feel like they matter. That is why it is important to make your partner feel valued and loved. But even after I understood why people were seeking connection and why most relationships end, I still made the same mistake over and over again. I kept blurring the line between getting attention and actually being intimate with someone, and that nearly destroyed me. Because here is what no one tells you when you start this work. You are going to blur the lines between real intimacy and commercial intimacy. And when you do, you will lose money, clients, and yourself. Let me explain. Commercial intimacy is curated. It has clear boundaries. It's designed to meet the client's needs, companionship, validation, and an escape. You show up, you give them what they paid for, and you leave. Real intimacy is built on mutual emotional investment, vulnerability, a connection that grows over time because both people want it to. And the two are completely different, but I kept blurring them. Some of my relationships did start with them being my clients. I would have incredible bookings where a client and I really connected. We would talk for hours. He would open up, I'd feel seen, and I'd start thinking, maybe this is different. Maybe this is real. So I would start bending my boundaries. I would respond to texts outside of booking hours. I would share personal details about my life. I would let sessions run long without charging extra because it felt real, but it wasn't. And every time I blurred those lines, the same thing happened. The client would start treating me less like a professional and more like a girlfriend. They would expect more time for the same or less money. They would ask for favors. They would get possessive. And when I'd eventually have to remind them that this was a business arrangement, they would be devastated. They would ghost me and I'd be left feeling emotionally drained, financially worse off, and wondering what I did wrong. That is why I learned the hard way. Boundaries aren't just about protection, they are about clarity. When I kept my boundaries clear, booking times, no personal phone calls, no last minute changes, my clients respected me more. They paid more, they came back more, and they didn't expect more than what I was offering. I spent years learning everything I just shared with you, but I had to learn it the hard way. So that is why I created Escort Academy. It's a community built specifically for workers who want to work smarter, not harder. Inside, you will find resources on how to screen clients properly so you stay safe, how to attract and retain high-ticket clients who actually respect your boundaries, and how to build a sustainable business in this industry without burning out. I charged $2,000 an hour at the height of my career, and it did not happen by accident. Go to isabellefox.co to learn more about how we can help you with this too.